Welcome. My name is Griffin O'Connor. I'm CEO of Hardcore Connections. With me is the founder and CEO, Randall. We have started Hardcore Connections. It's been a business that we have been working on for the past several months, and our mission is to pretty much reach the community and help them from everywhere with substance abuse, mental health, and stigmas. To introduce more about Hardcore Connections, I'd like Jerry to talk a little bit more.
Right on, Griff. Thank you, man. It's super exciting stuff, right? As I've had this idea for several years now, before even working in the field, which I say it all the time. I love how God works. I knew that from my experience, or lived experience, being challenged with substance use disorder and mental health, it's near and dear to my heart. I knew something that was instrumental to me in my recovery was not only having some support mechanisms in my life that were knowledgeable about community supports that could be beneficial to help me maintain my recovery and improve my quality of life, but were able to help me bridge those connections. So there's a certain power in that, and I think a big part of, like you mentioned, some stigma, a big part of that, and even myself included, which kept me out there and disengaged from pursuing some measures of treatment, was I was uneducated about it. Right? I bought into the stigmas. I bought into, that this is a substance use issue. If I can abstain from the substance issue long enough, then the other issue should resolve, right? It took a lot of research and development to identify that, and then with multiple unsuccessful attempts at recovery, I think what a big part of that is the gaps in the continuum, right? And not having clear expectations of what to expect, So one of the things that I pride myself on, and the kind of the precedence of Hardcore Connections, is to provide that meaningful education, right? To give clear understanding and expectation of appropriate treatment mechanisms, helped work with Hardcore Connection staff to help an individual identify what the appropriate level of care is, and then more importantly, bridge that connection to it, right? It can be super overwhelming and challenging, right? If yourself or a loved one, you're trying to find out what may be beneficial to this individual, what do? We Google it. Right, you Google it, you get a list of a bunch of stuff, service providers, right? They all pop up at the top. They all look phenomenal, have great websites, right? But what insurance do they take? Is it a 5-day program? Is it a 28-day program? Do they have a clinical stabilization? Do they offer medications for opioid disorder? Do they have additional support mechanisms like a recovery support navigator, a recovery coach? Who knows, right? And even if you're reading these verbiage, do you know what they do? I know I didn't, right? I know I didn't for a long time, man. I remember sitting in treatment, and I'm hearing all these acronyms: ATS, CSS, TSS, MAT, IOP, OPP, who knows me, right? Some of these jazzes there. And because of the stigma, I didn't want anyone else to know I didn't know that, right? I wanted to feel like I was an experienced individual at navigating treatment, right? So I wouldn't ask the question. And as a direct result, my needs weren't getting met, So to have a clear understanding of what to expect, is it a viable treatment option that is beneficial to that individual? Because it very much needs to be individualized, right? So we've seen working with Hardcore Connections, when it's individualized and comprehensive in nature, it has a much higher retention rate, right? Because everyone is different. Everyone's histories are different. Everyone's experiences are different, So treatment needs to look different too, So kind of a second part of it, right? So education first, and then having that consistent care team, right? Someone that can run through assessment, right? Like the ASAM triage, the co-triage, or the ASAM assessment tool that we utilize to identify needs in all 6 dimensions of a treatment plan, identify community partners to get those needs met, and then help the individual meet those needs, right?
So Jerry, for those who don't know what the ASAM is, can you explain a little bit more about it?
Sure, so that's the American Society of Addiction Medicine, right? It's kind of the Bible, if you will, that the DSM-5 and the ASAM criteria is pretty much anything clinical intervention, right? It comes from either the DSM-5 or ASAM criteria. So in a treatment plan, there are 6 dimensions, right? The first 2 typically medical, 3 and 4 typically clinical, 5 and 6 typically community-based, And I know in my history working as an inpatient clinician for a few years, would only work on 2 dimensions. I would only work on 2 dimensions. And, and that was the clinical aspect, because my job was to keep an individual engaged in treatment and safe to be able to get to that next step in recovery, right? But if I'm not identifying all of these areas, I may be missing things that could pose as a potential barrier for that individual for staying engaged in a treatment continuum, right? So I think it's not only super beneficial, right, to screen and identify needs in all 6 of those dimensions, identify community partners to get those needs met, because we're going to need a lot of them. Us in early recovery or in active using have a lot of needs, right? And then have one consistent team member, Hardcore Connections team member, follow that individual through the continuum, right? I know for myself and my treatment experience, and I'm a social butterfly, dude. I like to talk. I'm a people person. I have no problem having a conversation, right? But I know it would take me 2 or 3 days to warm up to my care team, to my clinician, to the recovery specialist on the unit. I'm on there for a week, and then I transition to another level of care, which is a CSS or clinical stabilization service, and it takes me another 2 or 3 days to build that therapeutic alliance with my new care team, you know? So in those 2 to 3 days, I'm not utilizing my voice. I'm not advocating for my needs, right? I'm not seeking support mechanisms because I don't know you. I don't trust you. I already have trust issues that stem from extensive trauma history, you know, that comes along with substance use and risky behaviors and that we engage in when we're in committing nefarious activities, we'll put it that way. You know, so to have one consistent support mechanism through that. Now, my speculation is this hasn't happened historically because of some of the billing barriers and the insurance barriers that are out there, right? I'm not speaking negatively about insurance or Mass Health. We're super grateful to live in a state, you know, that can help individuals, you know, get their insurance subsidized through the state so they can access, you know, supports to improve their health, or mental health too. But typically, you can't bill for a lot of those services. So where does that leave? That leaves gaps. That leaves gaps in treatment. You know, so I love how we get creative, right? I bounce this off you as you're my operations guy. I'm an idea man. You know what I mean? I'm an idea man and a people man, right? How can we make this happen, right? So we use some of the services that are billable services, right? Like conducting a clinical assessment, the ASAM triage assessment tool, and some of those can offset some of the cost in that individual's continuum. Right? Because at the end of the day, I say it all the time, dude, money's not the motive, right? But let money be a byproduct of your motive. My motive is to help people, right? And I very much don't want individuals to experience some of the challenges and negativity that I did when trying to, you know, to engage in a program of recovery, you know, and stay in a program of recovery, right?
So,
how many times have you attempted recovery, Griff?
Several, at least 12 off the top of my head. I've been through, let's see, 7 detoxes, 3 rehabs, multiple IOPs, and at the end of the day, like similar to yourself, it's just like I didn't know what the next step was, and I kind of at a time I began to feel ashamed of myself because I just wasn't able to get it, if that makes sense. And it wasn't until like I actually really started using the connections that I found in these resource centers, in these treatment centers, and actually taking action, taking the information and the education that was given to me and spinning it in my head because, yeah, like we can have it, we can get information easily, but unless we start putting that into action, which was my biggest downfall was, yeah, I just took the information, but I never did anything with it.
Right.
Once I started doing something with it, that's when my life started to change, and it was by making myself vulnerable, by speaking to my counselors, to my case managers, asking questions. That way I learned, and I was able to get through the system and come out on the other side a better person.
Right, so until you have a therapeutic alliance, right, or a therapeutic rapport with someone, you know, that trusting relationship, to be able to speak openly about our needs. Right? If I don't know you, I'm not telling you nothing. I'm not telling you my history. I don't know you, right? But I think you hit the nail on the head. It's the connections, right? And we hear this. You've seen. Remember that TED talk, right? The opposite of addiction is connection.
Connections. Takes a village.
It takes a village.
Takes
right?
a village.
It takes multiple. Right, and no one agency can do that, you know. And I've seen this with the current or the previous service model that I was working on, you know, that I've seen that it takes multiple agencies, right? Because every agency, they have their own niche and their own skill set, right? It's infeasible to think of one agency that's going to be able to offer the whole continuum of treatment, right?
So where does hardcore come into that?
Right, so that's what we do well. right, is identify these community partners. We establish relationships and partnerships with them through QSOAs or MOUs, right, to streamline connections to these support mechanisms, right, whether that's the harm reduction center, right, for harm reduction supplies for someone that may be still actively using or engaging in risky behaviors, and use that as an opportunity for engagement, right, some motivational interviewing, some encouragement, right, I'm not here to tell you to stop shooting heroin or smoking crack, even though, because we know. I have people telling me for a long time, right, Jerry, you shouldn't be doing those things. And I know. I knew that. I didn't want to, right? Genuinely wanted to stop, and stop dozens and dozens of times, but couldn't stay stopped because I didn't know what connections were needed to help me continue gaining momentum and traction in my program of recovery.
So when did you start getting those connections?
2017.
2017.
Right, so I've been in active recovery since June 29th, 2017. And it was God putting good people in my life that had this experience, right? That said, no, Jerry, you need to go here. You need to go talk to so-and-so. Actually, better yet, let me give him a call. I'll give him a call and say, hey, can I put you on the horn with Jerry real quick? So it was someone helping to bridge those connections, right? And yeah, really helped me come up with a robust plan of action and keep me motivated for change, Something else that was instrumental in that is I get bored very quickly, right? I'm a very ADHD-driven dude,
boat.
right? I get bored very quickly, we hear it all the time, that people get so focused on a program, right? Going to IOP, I'm going to my individual and group counseling, I'm going to my AA meetings 5 days a week, I'm praying, I'm going to church, I'm volunteering, and our world becomes a program of recovery, right? Where's the pleasure and enjoyment in there, right? We need some other things that get the juices flowing. And I was blessed with a great group of individuals that were in long-term recovery that are part of my first home group in Alcoholics Anonymous, and we'd go do stuff. We'd go fishing, right? We'd go to the Bill Wilson retreat. We'd go Corey jumping. We'd go blow fireworks up, right? Out of state, of course, right? Do some of these things that get the juices flowing, and they remind me, this is why I'm working a program, right? I say it all the time to our peeps. If I could be high and miserable or sober and miserable, I'm going to pick high and miserable every time.
Oh, absolutely.
Right? So it's important that we have these connections to mitigate some of that misery, right?
Yeah.
Keep us motivated for change and keep us rocking and rolling,
So what are some of the visions that you see hardcore connections, like as you said, when everybody's focused on recovery, you spend some time having fun, how is hardcore connections gonna?
So we're going to innovate the contingency management platform here, right? So contingency management is an incentive system. It's an evidence-based practice, right, to give some type of monetary incentive for completion of treatment goals.
Okay.
Okay, historically they use gift cards, swag, stuff of that nature. I want stuff that gets the juices flowing.
Like what?
Right, so I kind of picture it like a Dave and Buster's card type of digs, right? So that your recovery actually funds your recreational activities, right? So a portion of the proceeds, that are raised from your recovery services that you're engaged in, whether that's clinical and individual group counseling, whether that's recovery coach services, whether that's RSN work, whatever it may be, robust things at an outpatient level, a percentage of that goes to fund your recreational activities, right? So that's something that happened. Again, I'm talking, a mountain biking trip, or go rock climbing, equine therapy. We're pursuing partnerships, with some equine therapies in Middleborough. Something that gets the juices flowing. And I think vision for the future, I could talk about this, right? We talk about dreams here.
Mm-hmm.
We're on TV. We can talk,
Absolutely.
My vision for the future is having a hardcore connection center, right? That not only has a whole continuum of care in there, right? So it's all from detox level of care, clinical stabilization, into residential treatment at 6-month living, with everything in between, right? A hardcore rec center, right? And I had this vision. I had this in a dream, Griff, right? It was REC in big letters, big purple letters, and then the top words said recovery, and the bottom said recreation. Right, so recovery-driven recreation, and I took this as a sign, right? And I was like, we need to make this a thing, and that's where my operations guy comes in, right? So how do we make this happen, Griff? Which I'm excited to pursue this, and get this rocking.
And I'm excited to be working with you, man. I mean, it's an honor to be able to work with you. I mean, just seeing the way that you work in the community, reaching out to people, going out of your way to just help anyone and everybody that you can is an inspiration to me and everybody else around you. So I'd like to transition this segment into stigma. So for the rest of this time, we're going to just talk a little bit about stigma and how it affects society, how it affects the community, how it affects the people affected by the stigma, and some ways that we can solve it. I look forward to talking to you guys later.
Our community, it's where we live, work, and raise our families. It's made stronger by our differences, richer by our shared experiences. But sometimes people face challenges that feel overbearing. That's where Hardcore Connections comes in. We're a nonprofit startup with a mission to provide invaluable education and connections at a community-based level. See a need in your community? Don't wait for someone else to fix it. Get involved. Be there to help those facing barriers to treatment and support. There is a lack of connections between the community and these support mechanisms. Let's be there to knock down those barriers and make valuable connections to meet the needs of the community. We all have different backgrounds, different needs. Hardcore Connections utilizes knowledgeable team members to identify an individual's needs and work to collaborate with our community partners to get those needs met. We believe in understanding and empathy. A united community is a compassionate community. Our children are watching us. Let's show them the power of unity and support. Let's build a community where everyone feels welcome, respected, and supported. We're here to provide the connections that make a difference for our children, for our future. Let's choose unity and support. Division weakens us. Barriers to treatment isolate us. But Hardcore Connections is here to change that. We choose connection over conflict, understanding over judgment. We are bridging the gaps that divide us. We're building a stronger, more united community where everyone gets the support they need. The time for unity and support is now. Contact Hardcore Connections to learn more.
Welcome back to Hardcore Connections. We're going to continue our conversation about stigma. So Jerry, talk more about stigma. What is stigma?
Stigma is a mark or label that is associated with a certain shameful connotation or mark of disgrace, right? We talk about how stigma is one of the biggest barriers for individuals to access treatment.
Yes.
Right. And this takes me back, man. This takes me back to my methadone days, right? Like with multiple unsuccessful attempts at recovery from opioids, would pick back up very quickly. And the reason that I wasn't willing to even entertain the thought of utilizing a form of medication for opioid disorder, like methadone or buprenorphine or Vivitrol, was because of the stigma associated with it, right? I remember my first experience with someone that had been on methadone was in Ash Street Jail, and homeboy in the cell next to me was kicking 100 and something milligrams on concrete, right? That was my first experience. I'm like, that's not going to be me, right? Even though I had that same exact kick from opioids, and I heard some of these things like, it's a life sentence, it's liquid handcuffs, right? All this stuff, and you're going to be on it for life. And after a few years, that word "on it for life" actually sounded entertaining to me, right? Mm-hmm. That a life sentence actually bared some hope to it, right? Because I knew continuing to use was going to be a death sentence, right? Yes. So against my better judgment at the time, right, got on the methadone clinic. Got on the methadone clinic and rocked that out, got on with a robust plan of action, not a time frame. So if I need to be on this stuff for a year, 2 years, 10 years, the rest of my life, I'm okay with that, right? But through having a solid aftercare plan and some meaningful connections, right, to help get those goals met, was able to come off the medication, right, and then transitioned to buprenorphine, Suboxone, rode that out for a couple years before transitioning to the injectable Sublocade. I rode that out for several months, and I've been off all medications a little bit more than 2.5 years now, which is why I speak very openly and candidly about my medication experience to destigmatize it, right? This is an evidence-based practice, right, with statistics to show that it can decrease our risk for overdose by 50%, right? That's huge.
So how did the stigma directly affect you? Like when you were in that early stage, when you said you were looking around and seeing all these people kick, what was going through your head when you first started going into methadone? Were you scared about what people were going to think?
Absolutely scared of the judgment, Griff, right? And this is coming from someone that was mainly in an AA fellowship, and this is not a negative thing about a fellowship by any means. I think it's individuals in the group, not the group itself, right, that were against it. saying you're not sober, you can't be picking up key tags or medallions if you're on this medication. You know, I actually had an individual stop me in the middle of a meeting, man. Like, I was super proud. You know, hey, they ask you what's one thing you did for your recovery today. If you did something from your recovery today, throw it up. And I threw it up, all excited. I'm like, because I did too. Right? I went to the clinic this morning, I got my dose, and I got my ass here to this meeting. And this guy says, I'm going to stop you there, son. This is Alcoholics Anonymous. Right? And it put a bad taste in my mouth, dude. I didn't go back to that meeting for a few weeks, right? My sponsor called, are you over it yet? I'm like, no, man, if I see this guy, I'm afraid what I might say to him. You know what I mean? Yeah, man, so that fear of judgment, you know, I believe is a barrier for many of us. Because it's still not as commonly, as well received as it should and could be. Right? It's better than it was, not as good as it needs to be.
So what is the new solution? Is there any new programs that are out that like people who are on methadone could go to where they're more
I'm glad
local?
you asked that, my dude. Right? So many people probably haven't heard about MARA. Right? MARA came out in 2019. It stands for Medication Assisted Recovery Anonymous. It is a 12-step based fellowship with non-judgment is the code. Right? The only requirement for membership is desire to live a safe lifestyle. Right? Wherever you're at. We got cats and groups still actively using, you know, that just want a safe space, you know. And what a phenomenal program. You know, it took a lot of the negative verbiages out. You know, some of the historic StepWorks fellowship is to break you down, give you a foundation to build you up, right? Which I get it, it makes sense. Someone that was as fragile as I was in early recovery, had I not had such a phenomenal support team, it probably would have taken me out, right? Because I wasn't in a position to relive some of those traumas, right? Without my coping mechanism, you know, and it leads to challenges, you know, You know, we had this dude, man, this was a couple of weeks ago. This guy's had a couple of decades in recovery from Alcoholics Anonymous and had a couple drinks, right? He was mowing his lawn, he had a couple of drinks. Didn't feel comfortable going to an AA meeting because of the fear of judgment, but came tomorrow. And we welcomed him with open arms. Right? Obviously, at these sites, you can't be actively consuming, right? You can't be actively consuming any substance, you know, or have any exchange of paraphernalia or substance, you know. But this dude wanted a safe space, man. He had 3 drinks. He didn't want to have a 4th, right? And he felt safe enough, right? And there wasn't that fear of judgment to get him in the seat, right? Homeboy didn't drink that day, and he came the next week. You know, it's phenomenal, man. And this is. I'm not even on these meds anymore, right? But I never want anyone to feel like I did. I want people to be able to speak their truth and live their truth, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Let's talk about what's working. Let's talk about what isn't, right? So we can get some education and hopefully some different connections, right? To help us continue to move forward and improve not only our health, but health equity in the community.
Yes.
Right, we know that ripple effect, right? So one person stays stuck, it doesn't just affect that one person, right? There's a ripple effect, and the community it is hit by detriment as a direct result.
What about mental health? What stigmas do you see when it concerns mental health? Like maybe like going to a therapist or a counselor? I mean.
Oh man, all right. So I was raised with Italians, old school Italians. You didn't talk about your mental health, right? You kept it in house, right? And you toughen up, rub some dirt in it type of stuff, you know what I mean? You know? Yeah, man, so mental health is a tough one, you know, but mental health is health, right? And a lot of the other symptoms and behaviors, not a lot of them, all of them stem from our mental, right? Which mental health access is near and dear to my heart. I'm the president of the board here for DMH in Plymouth. I'm on the area board as well. We oversee 7 boards in Massachusetts, and with a key focus on destigmatizing mental health, right? You think someone that stubs their toe feels like an idiot walking to the doctor and say, hey, I stubbed my toe. Of course not, right? You know, it's dependent on how you stubbed it, I guess, right?
So what are some things that are being done? I mean, being on the DPH board, like, can you kind of let us in on some
So
of the
we're
things that
talking
are
about
going on?
education, right? So just that's the number one thing,
Yeah.
right? Get it out there, right? It is common. Everyone is challenged with some type of mental health, right? Or mental health issues, right? Some more than others. Some constitute a diagnosis. Some are symptoms, right? What establishes a diagnosis is frequency and duration, pretty much, right? Frequency, intensity, and duration of these symptoms, you know. And left unmitigated will lead to a diagnosis which will require treatment, you know. So we're trying to provide some education and clear understanding of how mental health, untreated mental health, and substance use coincide. You know, we're doing this through community conversations, street talks, you know, DMH getting involved with some of these community events we got going on, like Unity in the Community, you know, here April 29th at the Plymouth. You want to hear more? I see you.
I do. Tell me more.
All right, so this is kind of a twofold point for an event. Right, so number one, it's to provide awareness, right, and bridge some gaps in the treatment continuum. But on the flip side, it's for individuals that are outside of the treatment sector, right, don't necessarily work in treatment, you know, to have some education and feel more confident engaging someone. They may see in line at Dunkin' Donuts or 7-Eleven that, you know, you can clearly tell there's something off with the individual, right? If I saw someone in line at Dunkin' Donuts, you know, potentially nodding out or something like that, and I just was at the Unity in the Community event and I was aware of all the inpatient and outpatient residentials, not only was I aware of it, but I had numbers to call, right? I'll call Griffin. Right? I'll call Pam, I'll call whoever it is, and bridge that connection. Hopefully it would up the ante and make that individual a bit more confident engaging someone in the community, which helps community and society as a whole.
So like you were saying, like it takes a village. So what are some of the community members who are going to be at this event?
Oh man, so this is Hardcore Connections in collaboration with High Point Treatment Center, PCOPE, which is the Harm Reduction Center, and the Plymouth Public Library. I think we have like 19 or 20 resource tables registered at the moment, anywhere from, you know, Greater Boston Addiction Treatment Center, Recovery Centers of America, Celebrate Recovery, Mass Organization on Addiction Recovery, Refuge, the list goes on and on.
Yeah.
Right, so resources from the whole treatment continuum, We got a presentation from the Plymouth Area Prevention Collaborative in coordination with Drug Story Theater to help identify and respond to an opioid overdose. It's going to be an interactive presentation because I want to identify some of the gaps in knowledge, right? And I know for myself, people would ask me if I knew something. Yeah, right. I was that guy when I was insecure. Like, did you see the game last night? I'm like, yeah, of course I saw the game. I didn't see the game, man. You know what I'm saying? Or have you seen this movie? Like, yeah, I saw the movie because I didn't want you to judge me, right? I wasn't a very insecure individual, so I would lie. You know, I don't want anyone to have to do that. I'm going to say, hey, do you know how to access inpatient treatment? Oh yeah, I'll call High Point. I'll call Gosnold. I'll call whoever the case may be to bridge that connection right then, right there.
Wow, I mean, amazing stuff is going on. So if you were to spend 1 minute just to summarize like what's going on in your head, like going forward with the community when it comes to smashing stigmas and educating, what would you say?
That's a loaded question, Griff, because I got big dreams, man, as you know, right? I'm thinking just expanding our reach and community partnerships, right? To eliminate some of that stigma, that Burger King versus McDonald's mentality, right? Like, we're all collaborators, man. I want Burger King to start calling McDonald's when they're out of beef type of deal. You know what I'm saying? And so there's no need to be grasping, right? How do we collaborate and provide wraparound support for these individuals, you know? So we're doing things like this, we're doing things like our PSAs here at the local scene. We got education, you know, up at the recovery corner, working with the Plymouth Public Library up there. Pursuing many other partners, right? Working with residential treatment centers, you know, Resurgence Recovery, North Cottage, just to name a couple, right? To help these individuals get the education and supports that they need to transition to be self-sufficient in their recovery and improved quality of life.
So thank you for joining us today in our conversation about hardcore connections and stigma. I'd like to ask you to join us next time with our conversation about hope and resilience with a guest speaker. Look forward to seeing you then.